My father slid the paper across the dining table like he was settling a routine bill. "Sign it," he said. "Sell the house to Madison for $250,000, or from today forward you are no longer part of this family." Nobody at that table flinched except me. Not my mother, who kept dabbing the corners of her mouth with her napkin like this was merely unpleasant, not cruel. Not my sister, who sat across from me in a cream-colored blouse with a small smile playing at the edge of her lips, like she had already won and was only waiting for me to catch up. Not my Aunt Carol, who stared down at her plate with the tight, uncomfortable expression of someone watching a wreck from behind glass. I looked at the number again. $250,000. For a house worth 3 times that. For my grandmother's house. The house where I had spent 5 years sleeping in a narrow guest bed, so I could hear her if she called in the night. The house where I learned how quiet grief could be. The house where she died with my hand in hers. My father leaned back in his chair. "You need to stop being emotional and start being reasonable." Madison finally lifted her wine glass and took a slow sip, still smiling. That was the moment I understood this dinner had never been about compromise. It was about obedience. It was about whether I would step back into the role they had written for me my whole life. The easier daughter, the softer daughter, the one who could be pushed until she apologized for taking up space. What none of them knew was that before I came to dinner, before my father cleared his throat and made himself judge and jury, I had already done something my family would never imagine from me. I had called my sister's CEO. And by the time Madison left me 17 missed calls the following Friday, it was already too late. If respect matters to you, subscribe. This is where dignity is defended. My name is Holly Sinclair. I'm 34 years old, and until a year and a half ago, I still had a childish little hope that if I loved my family well enough, served them gently enough, forgave them often enough, they might someday love me in the same language. That hope did not die all at once. It died in pieces. It died every Christmas when my parents introduced Madison like she was their proudest investment and me like an afterthought with good manners. It died at birthday dinners when they asked her about promotions and bonuses and company perks, then turned to me with a smile that never quite reached their eyes and said, "And Holly's still teaching." Still teaching. As if I were still waiting for my real life to begin. Still teaching. That was how my parents described my life. Not proudly. Not even neutrally. Just dismissively. Like the job itself was a phase I would grow out of, once I understood how the real world worked. Madison's life, on the other hand, was always told like a success story in progress. She just closed another deal downtown. Her firm is expanding again. They gave her a company car this year. Every holiday dinner felt like a press conference about my sister's future. And I was the background furniture. I learned early how to sit quietly at the edge of conversations. How to smile when people talked over me. How to nod when relatives said things like, "Teaching is sweet, Holly, but Madison, she's really going places." It sounds small when you say it out loud. But when you grow up inside that kind of comparison, year after year, it becomes the air you breathe. Madison was ambition. I was kindness. Madison built things. I helped. Madison earned admiration. I earned polite approval. My father once told a neighbor at a barbecue, "Madison thinks like a CEO." Then he gestured vaguely toward me and said, "Holly has a good heart." He meant it as a compliment. But even then I knew what he was really saying. One daughter was impressive. The other one was nice. If you've ever lived inside a family where someone else's success becomes the measuring stick for your worth, you know the quiet exhaustion that comes with it. Sometimes people don't yell. They just rank you. And you spend years trying to climb a ladder that was never meant for you. But there was one person who never treated me that way. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore. Her house stood on Maple Street, right in the old Victorian district, where the trees arched over the road like cathedral windows. The first time she told me something that changed the way I saw myself, we were sitting on her front porch drinking sweet tea. "You remind me of myself," she said suddenly. I laughed. "Grandma, you ran 3 businesses." And you stayed with people when they needed you, she replied calmly. That takes more strength than building an empire. I remember looking at her, unsure whether she was joking. But she wasn't smiling. Quiet strength gets underestimated, she said. That doesn't mean it's weak. Some of you listening right now know exactly what that feels like to be the one people underestimate until the day you stop playing the part they wrote for you. If that's you, tell me where you're listening from tonight. I always wonder how far these stories travel. Back then, though, I wasn't thinking about strength. I was thinking about Sunday afternoons. Because every Sunday, no matter what else was happening in my life, I drove to Maple Street and sat with my grandmother on that porch. And those afternoons became the most honest hours of my week. Until the day the doctors told her she had 18 months left to live. The doctors said 18 months. Maybe 2 years if the treatments went well. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I remember the way the words hung in the air of that hospital room like something fragile and impossible to hold. Grandma Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't panic. She simply nodded once, thanked the doctor for his honesty, and asked if she could go home. On the drive back to Maple Street, she watched the trees passing outside the window. 18 months, she said quietly. That's more time than some people get. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Grandma, they could be wrong. Medicine changes all the time. She smiled the same calm smile she'd worn my entire life. Holly, sweetheart, when you've lived long enough, you learn when to listen. We didn't talk about it again that day. But everything changed after that. Madison visited once. She arrived in a tailored gray suit, carrying a small bouquet of flowers that still had the grocery store barcode sticker on the plastic wrap. She stayed exactly 45 minutes, spent most of that time answering work emails on her phone, then stood up suddenly and said she had a meeting she couldn't miss. My parents came the following weekend. They sat stiffly in the living room, drinking coffee they barely touched. My mother cried quietly the whole time. My father kept saying things like, "We hate seeing you like this," as if Grandma had somehow done something wrong by getting sick. They left before sunset. After that, they stopped coming. There's always something, my mother explained during a short phone call a few weeks later. Your father's schedule, Madison's work. It's just very hard for everyone. Hard. The word sat in my chest like a stone. Because the truth was simpler. It wasn't that it was hard. It was that they didn't stay. So I did. I took a leave of absence from the elementary school where I taught second grade. I packed 2 suitcases and moved into the small guest bedroom at the end of Grandma's hallway. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. Just a few weeks until we figured things out. But illness doesn't follow neat timelines. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. 5 years. 5 years of early mornings measuring medications, of long afternoons reading out loud when the chemo left her too tired to hold a book, of quiet nights sitting beside her bed while the house creaked softly around us. Some nights the pain was so strong she could barely speak. Other nights we talked about everything. Her childhood. My students. The strange ways families love each other. You gave up a lot to be here, she said once, while we sat in the sunroom watching rain slide down the windows. I didn't give anything up, I told her. She studied my face carefully. Don't shrink your choices, Holly, she said gently. You stayed when it mattered. Anyone who has ever cared for someone through illness knows that strange mixture of exhaustion and devotion. It doesn't feel heroic. It just feels necessary. And if you've ever been that person, the one who stayed when others drifted away, you understand something most people never see. Love is often quiet work. But quiet work still counts. Grandma Eleanor lived 5 more years after that diagnosis. 5 years longer than the doctors predicted. And on a soft April morning, with sunlight pouring through the bedroom curtains, she took one final breath while holding my hand. Just before she closed her eyes, she whispered something that didn't make sense to me at the time. I've prepared everything for you, she said. Don't let anyone take it away. 3 weeks after the funeral, we gathered in a law office downtown for the reading of the will. The room felt colder than it should have. Dark wood shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound books that smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The long conference table reflected the overhead lights in a dull shine. Everything about the place felt formal, final, like a quiet courtroom where lives were rearranged without raising anyone's voice. My parents sat together on one side of the table. Madison sat across from them, scrolling through something on her phone like this meeting was an inconvenience squeezed between two important appointments. I chose the chair closest to the door. Not because I planned to leave early, just because I always preferred having an exit. Grandma's attorney, Mr. Patterson, adjusted his glasses and opened a thin folder. "Thank you all for coming," he said politely. "We'll begin with Eleanor Whitmore's final testament." The room fell silent. Even Madison finally set her phone down. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat and began reading in a calm, careful voice. Most of the document was ordinary: a few charitable donations, some personal belongings distributed among distant relatives, small details that passed through the room without much reaction. Then he reached the final section. "I, Eleanor Marie Whitmore," he read, "being of sound mind and legal authority, hereby leave my property located at 847 Maple Street to my granddaughter, Holly Elizabeth Sinclair." He paused briefly. The only one who stayed when everyone else left. The silence that followed felt almost physical. My mother's hand froze halfway to her glass. My father leaned forward sharply, like he hadn't heard correctly. But Madison's reaction was the one I remember most clearly. Her eyes snapped up from the table, and the smile she always wore in family gatherings disappeared completely. "There must be some mistake," she said immediately. Her voice was calm, but tight. "Grandma was very sick. She couldn't have been thinking clearly when she signed that." Mr. Patterson removed his glasses and polished them slowly. "Your grandmother executed this will with 2 witnesses and a licensed notary," he replied. "She was fully competent at the time." Madison's jaw tightened. My father looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. And in that moment, before anyone said another word, I understood something that would shape everything that came after. For the first time in my life, I had something Madison couldn't take from me. At least, not yet. The meeting ended quickly after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because no one in that room knew what to say. My mother kept staring at the will like the words might rearrange themselves if she looked long enough. My father leaned back in his chair, his arms folded tightly across his chest, his jaw working slowly like he was chewing on anger he hadn't decided how to use yet. Madison was the only one who spoke again. "This doesn't make sense," she said sharply. "Grandma would never do something like this." Mr. Patterson closed the folder calmly. "Your grandmother was very clear about her wishes." Madison turned toward me then, and the look in her eyes was different from anything I had ever seen before. Not annoyance. Not dismissal. Something colder. "You manipulated her," she said quietly. The accusation landed in the room like broken glass. I blinked at her. "I took care of her," I said. "For 5 years." Madison let out a short laugh. "Anyone could have done that." The words were casual, dismissive, but they hit harder than anything else she had said. Anyone. 5 years of medications, hospital visits, sleepless nights, and holding someone's hand while their body slowly gave up, reduced to something anyone could have done. I didn't answer. Because for the first time, I understood something important. This wasn't about fairness. It never had been. It was about control. And Madison had just lost it. The lawyer slid a sealed envelope across the table toward me. "Your grandmother asked me to give this to you personally," he said. "She said you would know when to open it." The paper felt heavier than it should have when I picked it up. I slipped it into my purse without opening it. Outside the law office, the late afternoon sun hit my face, warm and bright after the cold quiet of the conference room. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Madison stepped closer to me. "So this is what it feels like," she said softly. "What?" She tilted her head slightly. "You getting lucky for once." I looked at her carefully. For most of my life, Madison had never needed to compete with me. I had never been considered a threat. But standing there on that sidewalk, I could see the calculation already happening behind her eyes. She wasn't angry because she wanted the house. She was angry because I had it. And for the first time in 34 years. That changed everything. The pressure started 3 days later. My parents showed up at the house without calling. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard the front door open, and my mother's voice drift down the hallway like she still lived there. "Holly, we need to talk." They were already sitting in Grandma's living room when I walked in. My father had taken his usual place in the armchair near the window. My mother sat stiffly on the couch, her purse on her lap like she was waiting for a meeting to begin. Neither of them commented on the fact that this was now legally my house. "We've been thinking about the will," my father said. I stayed standing. "And?" I asked. My mother sighed the way she used to when I was a teenager who had disappointed her. "Holly, it just isn't right." The words felt familiar. "What isn't right?" "One person keeping everything," my father said, gesturing vaguely around the room. "Your grandmother's house was always meant to stay in the family." "It is in the family," I said. My mother shook her head immediately. "That's not what your father means." Of course it wasn't. Madison's name entered the conversation exactly 30 seconds later. "Your sister is thinking about her future," my mother continued carefully. "Marriage, children, stability." My father leaned forward. This house would be perfect for her. There it was. Not a request. A conclusion. I looked around the room slowly. The tall windows. The worn hardwood floors. The bookshelf where Grandma kept her gardening journals. "You want me to give it to Madison?" My father frowned. "Don't be dramatic." "We're talking about selling it to her," my mother corrected gently. "At a fair price." "What price?" My father answered without hesitation. 250,000. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. The house was worth 3 times that. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it. "Dad," I said quietly, "the market value is around 750. He waved his hand dismissively. "That's not the point." And suddenly, I understood something that had been quietly shaping this conversation from the beginning. To them, the point had never been the house. The point was making sure Madison still came out on top. The visits didn't stop after that. They multiplied. Every day for the next 2 weeks, someone from my family appeared at the house like it was their shift to apply pressure. Sometimes it was my father, standing stiffly in the doorway with his car keys still in his hand. Sometimes it was my mother, arriving with pastries from the bakery down the street like we were about to have a pleasant afternoon conversation. And sometimes it was both of them together, playing a routine I knew too well. "Good cop. Bad cop. Holly, this stubbornness isn't like you," my father said one afternoon, pacing slowly across Grandma's living room. My mother sat beside me on the couch, touching my arm softly. "Your sister just needs a little help starting her future." Starting her future. Madison was 32 years old. She had a 6-figure salary, a company car, and a corporate expense account. But somehow I was the one standing in the way of her future. "You're not thinking about the family," my father continued. "You're thinking about yourself." I looked at him carefully. The strange thing was, he actually believed that. To him, fairness meant making sure Madison kept winning. "Dad," I said quietly, "Grandma left the house to me. That doesn't mean she meant it to stay with you." The words landed harder than I expected. My mother squeezed my hand. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "you're a teacher. You don't need a big house like this." There it was again. The quiet ranking. Madison needed things. I didn't. "She has plans," my mother continued. "She's building something." And I wasn't. At least, not something they respected. That night, after they left, I sat alone at Grandma's kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock above the stove. For the first time since the will reading, doubt crept in. Not about the house. About the cost. Because if I refused them, I might lose my family completely. And I didn't know yet if I was strong enough to survive that. They called it a family meeting. But when I walked into the living room that night, it felt more like a courtroom. My parents were already seated, my father in the armchair by the window, my mother on the couch beside him. Madison stood near the fireplace, scrolling through her phone with the bored impatience of someone waiting for a meeting to start. She didn't look up when I entered. "Let's not waste time," she said finally. "I have dinner at 9. My father cleared his throat and reached into a leather folder. He slid a document across the coffee table toward me, the same way he would weeks later at that dinner. But this was the first time. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. I didn't touch the paper. "What is it?" "A sales agreement," he replied. "You sell the house to Madison for $250,000. We settle this tonight and move on like a family." Madison finally looked up. She leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed, watching me like someone observing a slow student solving a simple math problem. I glanced down at the document. The number was printed clearly near the bottom. $250,000. Even seeing it again made something tighten in my chest. "The house is worth around $750," I said quietly. Madison laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was the kind people give when they believe they're correcting someone naive. "Market value isn't what you think it is," she said. "Have you ever sold property before, Holly?" "No." "Exactly." She walked closer, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors Grandma had polished every spring. "I work in this industry," she continued. "Negotiations, valuations, development. Trust me, 250 is generous." Generous. The word hung in the air. My mother leaned forward quickly. "It's a family price," she added, smiling softly like that explanation solved everything. Family price. I looked around the room slowly. At my father's expectant expression. At my mother's hopeful smile. At Madison's quiet confidence. And for the first time, something inside me shifted. Because suddenly the choice in front of me became painfully clear. If I signed that paper, I wouldn't just lose the house. I would lose the last piece of the woman who had believed I was worth something all along. The room stayed quiet after that. Not peaceful, quiet. The kind of quiet that stretches tight like a rope before it snaps. My father tapped the paper on the table. "Holly, just sign it," he said, his voice already losing patience. "We're not asking for anything unreasonable." I looked down at the document again. The numbers didn't change. $250,000. A third of what the house was worth. A third of the value of the place where my grandmother had lived for 43 years. A third of the place where she told me I had quiet strength. Madison shifted her weight and checked the time on her phone. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," she said. I lifted my eyes. "Am I?" "Yes," she shrugged. "It's just a house." Just a house. I thought about the 5 years I had spent inside these walls. The early mornings making oatmeal when Grandma's stomach couldn't handle anything heavier. The long afternoons sitting beside her bed while rain tapped softly against the windows. The nights when she woke up confused and scared, and I held her hand until she fell asleep again. Just a house. "You didn't come here when she was sick," I said quietly. Madison rolled her eyes. "I had a career to build." The words were said casually, like that explained everything. "And I didn't?" I asked. She laughed. "Holly, you teach kids how to color inside the lines and sing the alphabet song." My mother shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Madison." But Madison didn't stop. "You don't understand real money," she continued. "You don't understand property value or development or investments. You're emotional about this because you don't know how the real world works." Something in my chest went very still. For most of my life, those words would have made me shrink. Apologize. Back down. But standing there in my grandmother's living room, I felt something different. Clarity. This wasn't a conversation. It was a test. And the answer they expected was the same one I had given my whole life. "Yes. Yes, Madison. Yes, Dad. Yes, Mom." But for the first time in 34 years, I realized something important. No was also an option. No. The word came out quieter than I expected. But in that room, it sounded louder than anything I had ever said. My father blinked. Madison actually laughed, like she thought I was joking. But I didn't move. I'm not signing it, I said. The shift in the room was immediate. My father leaned forward in his chair, his voice tightening. Holly, don't be ridiculous. I'm not being ridiculous. Madison crossed her arms, studying me carefully now. You really think you're keeping the house? She asked. It's already mine. My father slapped his hand on the table hard enough to make the pen jump. That house belongs to this family. It does, I said calmly. And Grandma decided it belongs to me. For a moment no one spoke. Then my mother stood up slowly. Holly, she said softly, walking toward me. Sweetheart, you're letting grief cloud your judgment. Her voice had changed. Gentler. Warmer. The same tone she used when I was a child and had done something wrong but didn't realize it yet. This house is too much responsibility for you, she continued. The maintenance alone, taxes, repairs, it's overwhelming. She placed a hand on my arm. Madison knows how to handle these things. There it was again. The quiet assumption. Madison was capable. I was not. I can learn, I said. My mother's smile tightened. But why would you need to? She looked back toward Madison, then at my father. Families help each other, she said. You selling the house to your sister solves everything. I gently pulled my arm away. No, I repeated. The softness drained out of the room instantly. Madison's expression hardened. My father leaned back again, eyes narrowing. You understand what you're doing, right? He asked. I do. If you keep pushing like this, he said slowly, you're going to tear this family apart. The words hung in the air. For a moment, doubt flickered again. Because no matter how unfair this felt, they were still my family. Then, Madison stepped closer. Her voice dropped low enough that only I could hear. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she whispered. I met her eyes. And something told me. She wasn't finished trying to take that house from me. Madison called me at midnight. Not the next day. Not after things cooled down. Midnight. The kind of hour when the house is so quiet you can hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the wind brushing softly against the windows. I was still awake. Sitting at Grandma's kitchen table with the will spread out in front of me like it might still change if I looked at it long enough. My phone lit up. Madison. For a moment I considered letting it ring. But something told me this call mattered. So I answered. Did I wake you? She asked. Her voice sounded different now. The performance was gone. No family audience, no polite smiles. Just cold calculation. What do you want, Madison? She took a slow breath. I want you to understand something. I didn't reply. I know you think you won tonight, she continued. You think refusing to sign that paper makes you brave. A soft clink sounded on her end of the call. Ice in a glass. But you need to understand the world you're stepping into. I leaned back in my chair. And what world is that? The real one. Her voice sharpened. I'm a senior project manager at Mercer and Associates. Do you know how many development contracts we handle every year? How many city permits pass through our office? She paused. Do you know how many people owe me favors? I felt a slow chill crawl up my spine. Is that a threat? No, she said calmly. It's information. Another pause. Then she said something that made the room feel suddenly smaller. You still teach at Brookside Elementary, right? My grip tightened on the phone. What about it? Well, she said lightly, public school budgets are fragile these days. Administrators are always looking for reasons to reduce staff. My stomach dropped. You wouldn't. I wouldn't have to, she replied. All it takes is one phone call to the right person asking the right questions. Silence filled the kitchen. The ticking clock above the stove suddenly sounded louder. You're bluffing, I said. Am I? She let the question hang there. Holly, You've spent your whole life believing kindness protects you, that if you just do the right thing, everything works out. Her voice softened slightly. But this isn't your classroom. This is my industry. Then she said the words I will never forget. And in my world, I always win. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time after the call ended. My grandmother's house creaked softly around me. The same house Madison now wanted badly enough to threaten my career for. And for the first time that night, I realized something important. This wasn't just family pressure anymore. This was war. If you're listening right now and stories like this resonate with you, subscribe and stand for dignity. Because sometimes the quiet ones don't shout. They simply decide they're done being pushed around. And that night, staring at the dark window above Grandma's sink, I made a decision Madison would never see coming. I didn't sleep that night. After Madison hung up, I sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside the window slowly turned from black to deep blue. The house was silent. But my mind wasn't. Her words kept replaying. This is my industry. I always win. For most of my life, that kind of confidence from Madison would have been enough to make me doubt myself. She had always moved through the world like someone who knew the rules better than everyone else. And maybe she did. But sometime around 3 in the morning, a strange calm settled over me. Not anger. Not fear. Clarity. Because if Madison believed power was about influence and connections, then maybe the real mistake she was making was assuming she was the only one who had them. That was when I remembered the envelope. The one Mr. Patterson had slid across the table after the will reading. I had dropped it into my purse that day and never opened it. At the time, everything had been too overwhelming. But now it felt like the right moment. I walked upstairs to the guest room where my bag still sat on the dresser. The envelope was exactly where I had left it sealed, slightly creased at the corner. Grandma's handwriting curved across the front. For Holly. My hands hesitated for just a second before opening it. Inside was a folded sheet of lavender stationery. And a business card. I unfolded the letter first. My dearest Holly, if you are reading this, it means someone is trying to take the house from you. My chest tightened. She knew. Even before she passed away, she had known exactly how this would unfold. Your parents have always measured success in the wrong ways, the letter continued. But I never have. I had to pause there for a moment because my eyes blurred. Then I kept reading. If you need help protecting the house while still protecting yourself, call the woman on the card enclosed with this letter. I looked down at the card. Linda Torres. Real estate attorney. The name stirred something faint in my memory. Then it hit me. Linda had been one of Grandma's former clients years ago. But there was one line in the letter that made me sit very still. Remember this, Holly, Grandma had written. Sometimes the smartest way to hold on to something is to let go of it the right way. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I picked up my phone. The sun was just starting to rise when I dialed the number on the card. It rang twice. Then a woman answered. Linda Torres speaking. My voice felt steadier than it had the night before. Hi, I said. My name is Holly Sinclair. There was a brief pause. Then Linda said something that made the hair on my arms stand up. I've been expecting your call. Before I tell you what Linda explained to me next, let me ask you something. Some of you listening right now have probably faced a moment where someone tried to push you out of what was rightfully yours. Not with fists, but with pressure, with guilt, with threats dressed up as concern. If you understand that feeling, join where dignity stands. Because the plan Linda Torres laid out that morning was the first move in a game Madison didn't even realize she had already lost. Linda Torres listened without interrupting. I told her everything. About the will reading. About the daily visits from my parents. About the family price. And finally, about Madison's phone call the night before. When I finished, the line stayed quiet for a moment. Not the awkward kind of silence. The thoughtful kind. Well, Linda said finally, your grandmother was right. About what? You're going to need protection. The word made me sit up straighter in my chair. Legal protection, she clarified calmly. From pressure, intimidation, and manipulation. I exhaled slowly. That's exactly what this feels like. Linda made a quiet sound of agreement. Tell me something, Holly. Where exactly is the property located? 847 Maple Street, I said. In the Victorian district. There was a pause. Then a soft whistle on the other end of the line. Are you sitting down? She asked. I am. Good. Because that house isn't just valuable. She paused. It's strategic. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? The Victorian district has been attracting development attention for the past 2 years, she explained. Boutique offices, satellite corporate spaces, high-end conversions. My stomach tightened. And your grandmother's house? Prime location, Linda said. Large footprint, historic charm, corner lot access. Developers love that combination. I stared out the kitchen window at the quiet street. I had never thought about the house like that. To me, it was just Grandma's home. What does that have to do with protecting it? I asked. Linda's voice grew thoughtful. There's a legal structure called a sale-leaseback agreement. I had never heard the term before. Basically, she continued, you sell the property at full market value to a buyer who wants the building as an investment. And then what? Then you lease it back. I blinked. You mean I still live here? Yes. For how long? That depends on the contract, she said. But 15 years is common, sometimes longer. The idea felt strange at first. Selling the house, but staying. And my family couldn't interfere? I asked carefully. No, Linda said. Her answer came without hesitation. Once ownership transfers legally, and the lease is signed, the arrangement becomes a business contract. A contract. Not an argument. Not a family debate. A structure that no amount of guilt or pressure could unravel. But who would buy a house where the seller is still living upstairs? I asked. Linda gave a quiet laugh. Quite a few investors would. Then she added something that made my pulse quicken. In fact, I might already know one. My fingers tightened around the phone. Who? She took a slow breath. The CEO of Mercer and Associates has been looking for a property in your exact neighborhood. My heart skipped. Mercer and Associates. Madison's company, Linda continued calmly. Jonathan Mercer wants a satellite office on that side of town. The kitchen suddenly felt very still. And your grandmother's house, Linda said, would be perfect. For a few seconds after Linda said it, I couldn't speak. Mercer and Associates. Madison's company. The same place she had bragged about during family dinners. The same place she claimed gave her influence, connections, power. And now, their CEO might be interested in my house. You're serious? I finally asked. Very, Linda replied. Jonathan Mercer has been scouting properties for months. Historic buildings in developing neighborhoods. Something with character. I looked around the kitchen slowly. The tall windows. The crown molding Grandma had insisted on restoring years ago. The original oak floors that creaked softly when you walked across them. To me, it was just home. To someone like Mercer, it was opportunity. There's something you should understand, Linda continued. Jonathan Mercer doesn't make emotional decisions. Everything he does is strictly business. That sounds perfect, I said quietly. It usually is. But, Linda paused. But if you move forward with this, your sister will almost certainly find out. I let out a slow breath. That was going to happen anyway. Another short silence passed between us. Then Linda said something that surprised me. You don't sound angry. I thought about that for a moment. A week ago, I probably would have been furious. Humiliated. Desperate to prove something. But now the feeling was different. No, I said finally. I'm just clear. Clear about what? That this was never really about the house. Linda didn't interrupt. She doesn't want it because she needs it, I continued slowly. She wants it because I have it. That had been the realization sitting quietly in the back of my mind since the family meeting. For the first time in our lives, I possessed something Madison couldn't take by simply demanding it. Linda gave a thoughtful hum. You might be right. Then her tone shifted slightly, becoming more practical. I can arrange a meeting with Mercer, she said. No commitments, just a conversation about the property. My heart started beating faster. And if he's interested? Then we structure the deal. A sale-leaseback, I said. Exactly. The idea still felt strange. Selling the house, but not leaving it. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My parents couldn't pressure me to sell to Madison. Madison couldn't threaten me for something I no longer owned. And yet, I would still wake up every morning in the same bedroom. Still drink coffee in Grandma's kitchen. Still sit on the porch where she used to tell me stories about her youth. It wouldn't just protect the house. It would protect me. When would he want to see it? I asked. Linda answered without hesitation. He's in town next week. I looked around the kitchen again. For the first time since the will reading, the house didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like a plan. The house looked different the next morning. Not physically. The same sunlight spilled through the tall windows, the same quiet street stretched beyond the garden gate, the same old oak tree leaned slightly over the front yard like it had for decades. But something inside me had shifted. For weeks, this house had felt like a battlefield. Every room held tension. Every knock on the door carried the possibility of another argument. Now it felt like something else. A piece on a chessboard. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to Madison's moves. I was planning my own. Linda called again 2 days later. I spoke with Mercer's office, she said. My heart picked up speed. And? He's interested. Those 2 words hung in the air. What does that mean exactly? I asked. It means he wants to see the property in person. I glanced around the living room. Grandma's old bookshelf still lined the wall. Her rocking chair sat by the window where she used to knit in the afternoons. The scent of lavender from her old sachets still lingered faintly in the hallway. It still felt like her house. Not an investment. Not a development opportunity. But I understood something now that I hadn't before. If I wanted to protect it, I had to stop thinking emotionally about it. When would he come? I asked. Next Friday afternoon, Linda said. He'll bring 1 associate and an architect. An architect? The word made the situation feel suddenly more real. They'll probably evaluate the structure, Linda added. Layout, square footage, potential office conversion. Office conversion. Part of me felt a small ache hearing that. The thought of Grandma's living room turning into a conference space seemed strange. But then I remembered something she once told me while we were sitting on the porch during one of her better days. Houses change, she had said, watching the neighborhood kids ride bikes down the street. But love stays in the walls. At the time, I hadn't fully understood what she meant. Now I did. Even if the downstairs became offices. Even if new people walked those floors during the day, her memories wouldn't disappear. They were built into the place. And most importantly, I would still be there. When Madison finds out about this, I said slowly, she's going to lose her mind. Linda chuckled softly. Probably. I leaned back in Grandma's old rocking chair. But here's the thing, Linda continued. If Mercer buys the property, it becomes a corporate asset. Your sister won't be able to touch it. And I'll still live here. Exactly. The thought settled in my chest like a quiet anchor. Madison believed she controlled the game. She believed influence and intimidation were enough to bend the outcome. But she had made one mistake. She assumed I was still playing by her rules. And next Friday, the board was going to change completely. Friday arrived faster than I expected. All week, the house had carried a strange kind of anticipation, like the quiet before a storm that might not even be visible from the outside. I spent Thursday evening walking slowly through every room. Not cleaning exactly, Grandma had always kept the place spotless, but straightening small things. Adjusting the books on the shelves. Dusting the banister along the staircase. opening the windows to let fresh air drift through the rooms. It wasn't about impressing Mercer. It was about honoring the house. Because if someone was going to evaluate this place as a business opportunity, I wanted them to see it the way Grandma had always kept it with care. Friday afternoon came with clear skies and soft sunlight filtering through the oak trees lining Maple Street. At exactly 2 o'clock, a dark sedan pulled into the driveway. My stomach tightened. 2 men stepped out. One of them I recognized immediately. Jonathan Mercer looked exactly like the kind of person who ran a multi-million-dollar real estate firm. Tall, silver hair, tailored charcoal suit. The kind of calm presence that made people instinctively listen when he spoke. The second man carried a leather portfolio and wore the thoughtful expression of someone already studying the structure of the house, probably the architect. I opened the front door before they reached the porch. "Mr. Mercer?" I said. He smiled politely. "Miss Sinclair, I presume." His handshake was firm but warm. "Thank you for meeting with us," he said, glancing past me into the entryway. Linda spoke very highly of this property. The architect stepped inside behind him, immediately scanning the ceiling moldings and the staircase. "Original woodwork," he murmured. "Impressive." Mercer took a slow look around the foyer. "You've maintained the house beautifully." "My grandmother did most of that," I said. "She lived here for 43 years. Mercer nodded thoughtfully. "Long-term ownership usually shows." We started the tour in the living room. The architect measured wall lengths while Mercer asked practical questions. Square footage. Foundation updates. Electrical upgrades. None of it felt intrusive. Just business. When we reached the sunroom overlooking the garden, Mercer paused. "This space would make an excellent meeting room," he said. Then he turned back to me. "Linda mentioned you're interested in a sale-leaseback structure." "Yes." "And you intend to remain living here?" "Upstairs," I confirmed, "if the arrangement works." Mercer studied me for a moment. Not suspiciously. More like he was measuring something beyond the house itself. Then he asked a question I hadn't expected. "Why not simply refuse to sell?" The answer came easier than I thought. "Because someone in my family is trying very hard to take the house from me." Mercer raised one eyebrow slightly. "I see." I hesitated for a moment before adding the part that mattered. "My sister works for your company." For the first time during the entire tour, Jonathan Mercer smiled. Jonathan Mercer's smile wasn't mocking. It wasn't surprised either. It was the kind of quiet smile someone gives when 2 pieces of a puzzle finally fit together. "I suspected as much," he said. I blinked. "You did?" Mercer nodded slowly and glanced toward the architect, who was still studying the window frames near the garden. "Your sister mentions her family occasionally," Mercer explained. "A teacher, same last name." He looked back at me. "When Linda contacted my office about a property owned by a Holly Sinclair, it wasn't hard to connect the dots." A strange mixture of embarrassment and relief passed through me. "So this changes things?" I asked carefully. Mercer shook his head. "Not at all." He spoke with the calm confidence of someone used to separating business from everything else. "I don't make decisions based on employee-family conflicts." He gestured lightly toward the room around us. "I make them based on value." The architect finished writing something in his portfolio and stepped closer. "Structurally sound," he said to Mercer. "Foundations solid. Layout is ideal for partial conversion." Mercer nodded. Then he turned back to me. "Your proposal actually makes the project easier." "How?" "Satellite offices work best when they feel human," he said. "Historic homes converted into professional spaces create a certain atmosphere clients appreciate." He paused, looking around the living room. "This house has that." I glanced toward the staircase leading upstairs. "And the lease back?" 15 years would be reasonable," Mercer said. "Long enough for stability on both sides." 15 years. That meant 15 more years waking up in Grandma's house, drinking coffee in the same kitchen, watching autumn leaves fall through the same tall windows. Mercer folded his hands casually. "One more question, Miss Sinclair." "Of course." Does your sister know about this meeting? I shook my head. No. A faint glimmer of amusement crossed his expression. She will eventually. I imagine so. Mercer studied me for a moment longer. Then he said something that surprised me again. You handled this situation very professionally. Thank you. He gave a small nod. My legal team will draft preliminary documents by Monday. Just like that. No drama. No confrontation. Just paperwork. The quiet kind of decision that changes everything. As Mercer and the architect walked toward the door, I followed them onto the porch. The afternoon sunlight had begun to fade across the street. Mercer shook my hand again before leaving. Miss Sinclair, he said. Yes? I believe your grandmother would approve of how you protected this house. For the first time that day, I smiled. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. By Monday morning, Linda had already emailed the draft agreement. I sat at Grandma's kitchen table again, the same place where I had opened her letter days earlier. Only this time, instead of fear sitting in my chest, there was something steadier. The document was simple. Mercer and Associates would purchase the house at full market value, $750,000. In return, I would sign a 15-year residential lease for the entire second floor. The ground level would eventually become a small satellite office. Everything was clean, legal, final. No family arguments. No emotional negotiations. Just terms. Linda called while I was halfway through the contract. Take your time reading it, she said. But I've already reviewed every clause. It's solid. I flipped through another page. And once this is signed? Your family can't touch the property, she said plainly. Not through pressure, not through threats. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. And Madison? I asked. There was a short pause. Well, Linda said carefully, she still works for Mercer. The realization settled quietly in my mind. If the house became Mercer's satellite office, Madison might end up working in the same building she had demanded from me. Not revenge. Just consequences. I finished reading the last page and set the papers down. For a moment I looked around the kitchen. The sunlight coming through the window. The small scratch in the wooden table from when I dropped a pan years ago. Grandma's old kettle sitting on the stove. Everything felt the same. And yet, everything was about to change. Are you ready to sign? Linda asked. I picked up the pen. For 5 years I had stayed in this house to take care of someone who mattered to me. Now I was signing something that would allow me to stay, without fighting the people who wanted it taken away. Yes, I said. Then I signed my name. Quietly. Just like that. The money arrived 3 days later. I remember the exact moment because I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing a coffee mug when my phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from my bank. At first I assumed it was something routine, maybe my paycheck from the school district clearing early. But when I picked up the phone and opened the alert, I had to read the number twice. $742,816. The full payment from Mercer and Associates after closing costs. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at the screen. Not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Security, freedom, and the quiet proof that the house my family had tried to take from me for $250,000 had just been sold for exactly what it was worth. I set the phone down slowly. Outside the kitchen window, the oak tree in the front yard swayed gently in the wind. The house itself felt unchanged. Same creaking floors. Same soft hum of the refrigerator. Same sunlight stretching across the old wooden table where Grandma and I used to eat breakfast together. The only difference now was the ground floor technically belonged to Mercer and Associates. Construction crews would arrive in a few weeks to begin converting the space into a small satellite office. But upstairs? Upstairs was still mine. My lease agreement guaranteed it. I walked up the staircase slowly that afternoon, running my hand along the smooth wooden railing. Grandma's bedroom was still exactly the way I had left it. Her books stacked neatly beside the bed. Her favorite blue sweater folded across the chair. I stood there for a while, letting the quiet settle around me. You were right, I murmured softly. Not about the house. About something deeper. Grandma had once told me that real strength didn't always look like fighting. Sometimes it looked like patience. Sometimes it looked like letting people underestimate you until the moment came when their assumptions worked against them. That moment had arrived. Madison didn't know yet. My parents didn't know either. To them, the house still looked the same from the outside. But everything had already changed. And the real shift would happen the following month. Because once Mercer and Associates finished setting up their satellite office, there would be an official launch event. Executives, managers, project leaders. And according to the internal company memo Linda had quietly forwarded to me, one of the senior project managers assigned to oversee the new office location would be someone very familiar. Madison Sinclair. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, she would walk into the building she once demanded I surrender, and she would do it knowing exactly who still lived upstairs. The night Madison left me 17 missed calls, I almost didn't listen to the voicemail. It was Friday, a little after 10 p.m. The construction crews had finished their first week converting the ground floor into Mercer and Associates' satellite office. The house was quiet again, just the way Grandma used to like it. I was sitting on the porch with a mug of tea when my phone started vibrating across the table. Madison. Then again. And again. By the time the calls stopped, the screen showed 17 missed calls. A minute later, a voicemail appeared. I stared at it for a long moment before pressing play. Her voice came through shaky, rushed, nothing like the controlled confidence she usually carried. Holly, what did you do? There was a pause, like she was pacing somewhere. Please call me back. The message ended there. No threats. No superiority. Just confusion. And maybe something else. Earlier that evening, Mercer and Associates had held the official opening reception for the new satellite office downstairs. Executives from headquarters, department managers, investors, and Madison. From the upstairs hallway, I had heard the applause when Jonathan Mercer gave his short speech. I hadn't planned on attending, but Linda had convinced me to stop by briefly. After all, she said with a small smile, you're the reason the office exists. So I walked down the stairs halfway through the event. The room had been filled with people holding champagne glasses and discussing development projects. Mercer noticed me first. He stepped forward and gestured toward the room. Everyone, he said calmly, I'd like you to meet the person who made this property available to us. The conversation softened. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. This is Holly Sinclair, Mercer continued. The former owner of the house, and now our residential lease partner upstairs. Then he added something that changed the entire room. She negotiated one of the cleanest property transitions I've seen in years. Applause followed. Polite at first, then stronger. Across the room I saw Madison, standing very still, her glass frozen halfway to her lips. Because in that moment, the story she had told everyone that she understood property value, that she controlled negotiations, that she always won collapsed quietly in front of her colleagues. Not through shouting, not through revenge, just through facts, through contracts, through consequences. And that was the moment Madison finally realized something. The quiet sister she had always underestimated had outplayed her without ever raising her voice. If this story meant something to you, if you believe dignity matters more than winning arguments, subscribe and stand with us. Because sometimes the most powerful victories aren't loud. They're signed. And they last. As for me, I still wake up every morning in the same bedroom upstairs. I still drink coffee in Grandma's kitchen. And every Tuesday and Thursday, around 8:45 a.m., Madison's silver car pulls into the driveway for work. Sometimes she glances up toward the porch. Sometimes she doesn't. But the message is always the same. The house is still standing. And so am I.